What is going on YouTube? My name is Josh Frink, your favorite professional Pokemon TCG player, back here again today bringing you my take on a tier list for the meta for the Birmingham Regionals coming up this weekend over in the UK. Now, we have had a pretty large break from majors over here in the West. There was a major over in Japan in Osaka. I believe there was a Korean major as well, but Toronto was the last time that we have had a major over here in the West. So this will be the first one of the new year. And when we have these long breaks between tournaments, the meta can do some weird things. We kind of have to look at trends on social media as well as online tournament results to try and predict how the meta is going to adapt from Toronto. It's been a long time since Toronto, and so just looking at those results isn't quite enough. That being said, we are still going to take in the Toronto results as it was the most recent Western Regional. But realistically, the biggest thing from Toronto is just a reiteration of the fact, which is Regidrago is the best deck in format. We've all known it. We've all seen it in action. The deck is absolutely ridiculous, and so we are going to be making our tier list with a couple assertions, right? Those assertions being that Drago will increase in play, as well as a couple other decks. I think Gardevoir is looking to be on the rise. Lugia Archeops is looking to be on the rise. And the one deck that kind of came out of nowhere in this off time is Archaludon Dialga. It was able to win the Osaka Champions League over in Japan. Granted, it was a different format, right? They have Prismatic Evolution over there in Japan already, so Badu is already tearing up a storm over there. So the meta is a bit different, but people have found that the exact same 60 that won Osaka is still good in our current format, and so it has been having kind of a meteoric rise in some of these online tournaments, just racking up win after win, largely due to a very positive Regidrago matchup, as well as a very positive Snorlax and Pidgeot control matchup, which tend to be terrors in the online scene. So those are the things we're expecting to increase. I expect Charizard Pidgeot to go down a little bit. Something like Gholdengo I expect to go down a bit. And everything else I think is looking to stay about the same. Dragapult Iron Thorns had a relatively large representation in Toronto, and I don't really expect that that will stay the same. It didn't really do so well in Toronto, just like Gholdengo. So yeah, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. We are going to start with Regidrago, and we are going to put it right in the S tier. I am going to go ahead and give my percentage predictions. Take these with a grain of salt. We have a very, very decentralized meta, meaning that there are a lot of decks and a lot of decks that people are willing to play because they believe that they could potentially win a tournament. And so we're likely not going to see any decks above 15%. And so as a result, that is where I'm going to put Regidrago. I could see this being higher. Personally, I think that it should be more played, but we've seen recently that decks don't really exceed this number. So we're going to put Regidrago in the S tier. It is by far the best deck. It has answers to everything. Everything. Really everything. Even if Archaludon's a problem, realistically, it's not that hard to counter Archaludon. You play an Iron Bundle in your deck and the matchup becomes a 50-50. Like, Regidrago can answer every single deck. We just saw Calvin Connor win Toronto with the deck. We have seen time and time again. This was 6 of the top 8 in Toronto, 10 of the top 16, and it's not going anywhere. Charizard Pidgeot. It pains me a bit to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and put Charizard Pidgeot in the B tier. One positive thing for Charizard is that Archaludon has come into the meta. Charizard farms Archaludon. It is a great matchup for Charizard. Overall, Charizard has a very solid matchup spread. The primary reason why we are putting it in the B tier is due to 2 decks. The first is Regidrago. Charizard takes a terrible matchup into Regidrago. It's playable. It's a matchup that you can certainly navigate to some amount of success, but the matchup is holistically very unfavored. And so as a result, I don't feel comfortable putting it higher than A tier, but I also have a sinking suspicion that Snorlax Stall and Pidgeot Control are going to be piloted by some very good players. They seem like good plays right now. They're some of the few decks that really stand a chance against Regidrago. And so it seems like Snorlax and Pidgeot might be solid plays for Birmingham. And those matchups are also quite bad for Charizard. And so a combination of those things, as well as some other places of concern, right? The Dragapult Thorns matchup can be tough. Depending on the Gardevoir list, that matchup can be tough. Even Lugia can sometimes pose a bit of a problem. I don't feel comfortable putting it higher than B tier in terms of it as a play. However, I do expect it to be the second or third most played deck. I lean towards it being number 2. But I think it will go down in play from Toronto, so I'm going to go ahead and put it at 11%. Moving on to Gardevoir. This might be some personal bias, but the Toronto crew and myself played a really cool, slow Gardevoir list and had a lot of success. I was the worst performing player with a 9-3-1 record. I think that people vastly overestimate how bad Gardevoir's Regidrago matchup is, and it takes no other unfavored matchups. Every single other matchup is favored, in my opinion. There could be exceptions if standard deck lists change, right? Miraidon is historically a bad matchup that we solved with Mawile. If Miraidon chooses to include copies of Switch to counter Mawile, there you go, right? Then Gardevoir will lose that matchup. Similar to Gholdengo, I do think Gholdengo is favored with or without a Switch option, but it becomes a worse matchup, right? So depending on how the meta shifts and adapts to Guardy, it could be slightly worse, but right now your only bad matchup is a very strong Regidrago player, and so in my opinion, it belongs right up here with Regidrago. I think these are the two best decks in the format. I don't think it's particularly close. So yeah, gonna put Guardy an S tier. In terms of play rate, it doesn't tend to go much higher than like 6 or 7%. I do think it'll go up. I'm gonna put it at 7%. I expect it on the day 1 top 6 graphic, but I expect it to be on the low end of that, probably capping out at like the 4th most played deck. So we'll go ahead and put it at 7. Next up, we have Archaludon. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. I could see Archaludon being an A tier or a B tier play. You take a pretty solid matchup spread overall, right? Archaludon's biggest problems really are Gardevoir and Charizard. Your Gholdengo matchup is also tough, but outside of that, you take a really strong matchup spread. You're very strong against Regidrago. You might actually have the best Regidrago matchup of any deck in the format, and honestly, for that alone, I think it will go in the A tier. I posted a poll over on my Twitter. If you don't follow me there, feel free to drop a follow at DreamJew on Twitter, where I asked if people thought Archaludon would be on the day 1 graphic in the top 6 most played. I got about 400 votes. 200 of those votes said yes. 200 of them said no. I think the deck is strong. I think the deck is a bit inconsistent. But it's cool, and people tend to hop on the bandwagon of decks that beat Drago, so if they, like me, are predicting a slight drop in Charizard, maybe they can justify playing the Archaludon. So I'm going to put it in an A tier, and I'm going to say 6%. Next up, we're going to have Dragapult Iron Thorns. I'm going to go ahead and put Dragapult Iron Thorns in the C tier. This will be our first C tier inclusion. I just don't think this matchup spread is all that good. We see a lot of decks including Cologne. Charizard is including the Cologne more consistently now. Obviously, Regidrago already played the Cologne. So the Iron Thorn is a little bit less effective. Gardevoir is increasing in play. That's not a great matchup. Archaludon is existing now. That's not a great matchup. And so you're kind of in a weird spot where the deck just doesn't seem that amazing. I don't think the deck is terrible. I think it still takes some solid matchups, and if you get a little lucky, you can certainly win quite a few games. But in terms of winning the tournament, I'm going to put it quite low. So C tier for Pult Thorns. We're going to put it at a 3% meta share. That might be generous, but that's where we're going to put it. Raging Bolt. This is another flex AD. I'm going to put it in B tier. I think if you want to play a deck to beat Regidrago, I would rather play Archaludon personally than Raging Bolt. You kind of trade the turbo style of Raging Bolt for a more like overall robust positive matchup spread when you switch from Bolt to Archaludon. Raging Bolt takes on paper pretty poor matchups. Whereas Archaludon doesn't really, but what Bolt lacks in matchup percentages, assuming both players play the game the way they want to, it makes up for in the fact that it can just roll decks over if the decks miss a single turn, right? Charizard's a terrible matchup for Bolt, but if Bolt goes second, knocks out a one prizer, and then Charizard misses a beat, all of a sudden Raging Bolt is winning that game, right? It's so fast and so consistent that it can kind of win any game where you stall for even a turn. And so for that, I think Raging Bolt is still strong. And I do think that because it's a bit easier to play than Archaludon, it will probably see quite a bit more representation. But yeah, we're going to throw it in the B tier, and I'm going to put it at 9%. I expect Drago, Zard, and Bolt to be the most played decks. Next up, we've got Cloth Terapagos. This deck is also going to go in the B tier. It fell off pretty hard in Toronto. People were really expecting it to make a huge splash at that tournament. It ended up coming in at around 6%. I believe a couple of them made top 16, but neither of the players in the top 16 were in contention for top 8 going into that final round. And yeah, I don't know. I think Cloth Terapagos is a cool deck, but it's a bit solved, right? It struggles a bit in the mid game. Your Drago matchup's not quite as good as people sort of thought that it was, and so as a result, I think it's still strong. You do struggle against Charizard and Gardevoir, though, and Archaludon. And that doesn't feel great. You take really solid matchups elsewhere, and because, like I said, the meta is so decentralized, even if you take a bad matchup to Zard, Pidgeot, Gardevoir, and Archaludon, right? That is a total of 24% of the meta. Just avoid them. You can just avoid them. You can also donk both Charizard and Gardevoir using the Baby Petron, so it's not like they're complete losses, but I don't expect this deck to make huge waves this weekend. I know a couple European players, Christian Fontenot, Robin Schultz, really were big proponents of this deck, so it could end up being all right, but I'm going to put it at about 5% in the B tier for now. Turbo Roaring Moon's okay. I think it's kind of worse overall than Raging Bolt as a play right now. If you're going to play a Turbo deck, I don't see why I wouldn't be Raging Bolt personally. You could argue that Miraidon with a switch is better because of the Gardevoir matchup, but yeah, I just don't see a reason to play Turbo Roaring Moon compared to the other Turbo options. So we're going to put that about 3% as well in the C tier. Gholdengo is like a sneaky good pick, I think. Particularly the Gholdengo Palkia iteration is interesting to me. Being able to ninja against Gardevoir and Charizard in the early game particularly can be really good. Gholdengo is one of Archaludon's worst matchups because you can just one-shot the Bridge, and Bridge can't one-shot you. So Gholdengo really, really farms that Archaludon. So if Archaludon ends up being a big player this weekend, it's very solid there. You take a solid Turbo matchup, so if we expect Turbo decks in general to increase in response to how successful Drago has been, Gholdengo might be a sneaky good pick. I hesitate to put it higher than B tier because it does lose to Zard, it does lose to Guardy, its Drago matchup is 50-50, and so if you're taking an 0-2-1 record into the 3 best decks, it doesn't feel great, but I could see Gholdengo making some waves this weekend. I'm going to put this one right around 5% as well. I think Cloth Terapagos and Gholdengo are in similar positions. Lugia, this is going to be our next A tier pick for the weekend. Lugia has surprised me. I think Lugia was considered mostly dead in the format for quite a while, but Kieran Farah was able to pilot it to an asymmetrical cut finish back in Toronto, put on a really sick run. Regidrago wasn't really respecting Lugia at the time, not including Temple. People were really afraid of things like Lost Box, which could pose pretty big problems for the deck. Quad Iron Thorns was popular still at the beginning of the format, and Bolt Thorns is still a problem for the deck as well. Terapagos Dusknoir, which is one of Lugia's worst matchups, has also kind of fallen out of favor. So we sort of have seen this like tick up of Lugia, and I think that will continue. This is one of the only decks that has a holistically good matchup into Drago. Even if Drago plays Temple, I would still slightly favor Lugia. Very slightly, but still favor it. And some of the Drago lists are not even going to play Temple. And so, as a result, I think Lugia finds its place in A tier. It has a good Raging Bolt matchup. It has a passable Guardy matchup. It has a passable Charizard matchup. It has a good matchup against things like Pidgeot Control and Snorlax, which again, I think are going to increase in play. And so I think Lugia is a very solid play for this weekend. This is a deck that, when it's good, people play it. And so I'm going to make a bold prediction that this will be up there in play rate with Gardevoir. Maybe being that fourth most played deck is probably where I would expect it to be. We're going to put Ceruledge in the D tier. We're going to put it at 2%. This deck is not good right now. Once Budew comes out, it will be much better. So stay tuned. Once we have Budew, Ceruledge improves quite a lot in my opinion. Not even necessarily because you play Budew, which you can, but because it gives you the opportunity to sort of capitalize on the format slowing down, which is helpful for Ceruledge. Miraidon, I'm going to go ahead and throw in the B tier, I think, alongside Raging Bolt. Basically, Miraidon is worse than Raging Bolt, unless you expect Gardevoir and Lugia to be really highly played, in which case you should play Miraidon instead of Raging Bolt. I don't expect that many people will make that decision. I still think Raging Bolt will be the most played turbo deck, as it has been consistently. So we're going to, we'll put this one around 5% as well. Snorlax stall. I mean, I want to put Snorlax at the top of B tier. I'm going to order these in the tiers a little bit later, before the end of the video. I want to put Snorlax in the top of B, just because you lose to 3 of these 4, and your Drago matchup is like basically 50-50. But your Guardy matchup's terrible, your Archaludon matchup's terrible, your Lugia matchup's terrible, your Cloth matchup is pretty bad, and unless you play the Clef Keys, I guess. But you beat Bolt, you beat Charizard, you beat Dango, you beat Miraidon, Drago, especially like Snorlax is basically beating 90% of Drago players. It's really only 50-50 if your opponent's really good. So Snorlax seems like a solid play. I don't expect it to be super highly played. I'm going to put it about 3%, but I think it's a solid play. And then Pidgeot Control will get to the A tier slot. It has a much closer Gardevoir matchup. In my opinion, a much stronger Drago matchup. You have a winnable Lugia matchup instead of an auto loss. I haven't actually played the Archaludon versus Pidgeot Control matchup, but I would imagine there are lines that you can take as well. So I do expect some number of good players to play Pidgeot Control this weekend. I think it's a very, very strong archetype, so I'd be surprised if we don't see it do something. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put Pidgeot Control at a 2% meta share, and move on to Ancient Box, which is going into... Does this deck beat anything? I mean, it beats turbo decks. Okay. Sure. Your Drago matchup sucks, your Guardian matchup sucks. Maybe your Archaludon matchup is okay, but the Dialga seems like a pain. Your Lugia matchup is okay. Pidge Control seems not that good. Snorlax Sol seems good. You beat Bolt, you lose to this. You probably beat Cloth Terapagos. You beat Gholdengo. You're usually beating Dawn. Okay, yeah, this is C-tier play. I don't think it's great, but it's not the worst Ancient Box tournament I've ever seen. So we're going to go ahead and put Ancient Box at 3% in the C-tier. Lost Box is going in the D tier. It hurts me so bad to say this. Lost Box is favored into, like, maybe all of these decks except for Snorlax and Drago. I just don't think you can justify losing to Drago right now. It's probably more apt to put it here. I'm going to put it at about 4%. It's probably more accurate to put it here, but I just think losing that bad to Regidrago, like, Lost Box certainly has the worst Drago matchup of any of these decks, so I just don't think there's a great reason to justify playing the Lost Box. So we're going to go ahead and throw it in C tier. Terrapagos, we're going to put in B tier. With Lugia resurging, with Slowguardy especially resurging, with Snorlax being a decent play, you know, this deck also has a solid Drago matchup. Terrapagos seems like an alright play. You take a tough Pidgeot Charizard, that might be it. Your Cloth matchup is probably pretty bad. Your Gholdengo matchup isn't great, but on average, I think your Terrapagos Dusknoir tournament is, like, not bad. It's certainly not bad. I don't think it's quite good enough to get into the A tier, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this deck do well this weekend. I'm going to put Terrapagos Dusknoir at about 3% just because we haven't seen it very much. And then Palkia Noctowl is going to go into the B tier as well. Palkia Noctowl historically has a solid Drago matchup. Goodra and Hawlucha are trickling back into lists, which probably makes the deck a little bit worse. You take a rough Charizard, but you have a very good Guardy matchup. And again, a passable Regidrago one. You can always cheese Charizard out of games via Radiant Greninja. You have a really good Turbo matchup as well. So I think Palkia is a pretty solid play, maybe a sneaky one. We've seen a couple Palkias do quite well in Europe past. So yeah, the last 5% is going to be made up of random stuff, the Dragapult Dusknoirs of the world, and this whatever that's supposed to be, yeah, Chenpao, things like that. I'm not going to rank today just because I don't think they'll have enough representation overall, but yeah, I'm going to go ahead and order these in the tiers, and I will be right back. All right, so there you have it, guys. No surprise here. Regidrago coming in as my pick for the best play for the Birmingham Regional Championships. This deck has proven its dominance over and over and over and over and over. And if you can't tell, I'm sick of it. I would love for a tournament to not be overrun by Regidrago, and I'm very excited for Budu to be coming out so that Regidrago can maybe take a break from being the BDIF for a little while. We have Lugia coming in at the top of A tier. And yeah, Charizard Pidgeot, probably the best play in B tier as well. So let me know in the comments down below what you thought of my tier list. If you agree, disagree with me. If you watched Birmingham and you come back here and Saraledge won the whole thing, tell me how wrong I was in the comments down below. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. As usual, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all on the next one.